Hello and welcome to our Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. Dr. Montessori said, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree. So let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheesley Balis, and in today's episode, we're talking about our own growth as educators, more specifically, what characteristics adults might cultivate that are conducive to education and to flourishing classrooms. My guest today is Tammy Oesting. I am so excited to have Tammy with us. She comes to us with her MED, is an internationally known Montessori speaker and teacher, and self-identifies as a practitioner of awe and wonder. She serves educators globally through her company, Classroom Mechanics, as a consultant, trainer, and mentor. Tammy is widely published and is a founding member of Montessori Everywhere, receiving the 2021 AMS Community Service Award. She is a faculty member of the Institute for Educational Studies graduate program, and she cultivates content creators for Trillium Montessori and partnership in Principles to Practice. Tammy has a lifetime of travel and adventure, including the past years of traveling the world as a nomad and supporting Montessori communities both in the United States and globally before putting down roots in Santa Fe. Her professional passions include issues of social justice, educating support staff, neuroscience as applied to educational practices, and exploring the magnificence of the universe. Welcome, Tammy. I'm so excited to have you here today. I have been looking forward to this conversation. The truth is that I feel like I have so much to learn from you.
Oh, Tamara, thank you so much. I think the feeling's very mutual, and I'm just really grateful to be here and sharing some of my passions about professional development with you, with your listeners, with the broader community. We're together. Yay.
We are. We're in it together and we're better together. And just a little plug that I got the connection to you, Tammy, through TIES, which is, as some of you have heard me talk about, is the Institute for Educational Studies. And they are doing an amazing master's program that I am just absolutely loving. And I think you had that same experience.
I do. I have had and am still having. I am both a graduate of TIES, which really helped unleash my deep curiosity. And I think the TIES program really offered me a path to explore really big ideas, some of which I'm going to share with you today. And then I was brought on as a faculty member onto the TIES team. And I can share with you, it is transformational work from both sides. It is truly Montessori for adults.
It is. I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. So, okay. So we're going to dig in here. We're talking about the character development of the inspired educator. And as we know, as educators, we have to stay inspired. That is a part of our big work. And we have to stay learning in order to be inspired. That's current research. So talk to us first, Tammy, about how you got interested in this topic.
I really think character development hit me hard when I realized that as a classroom guide, the children absorb me fully. My good, my bad, my ugly, all of the parts. And that as a condition for my relationship with the child, with the environment, with my colleagues, actually with all things, I felt that need towards constant self-improvement. And I feel that subject of preparing adults both fascinating and vital. Parker Palmer wrote, "We teach who we are." And Dr. Montessori's prime directive that adults become an aid to life means that character development is an essential part of our role.
Yeah. I think it's also, there's so much in what you just said. But first of all, I think it's easy for us in Montessori schools to step over that character development. And Dr. Montessori actually said our first job is to self-reflect and our own character development so that it could be mirrored in our children. And I can tell you as a school administrator, I've talked about it every year, but really digging into it and thinking about what does that mean and how do I support my staff in this vital work? That's a whole nother layer. That's a whole nother game. And so can you talk about what the characteristics are of the inspired educator?
I can tell you a little bit from my perspective and some from my research. I also just want to note that these are huge, big generalizations because everybody's in their own trajectory. We all have our own place in our evolution as guides. So that being said, I bet that most teachers or guides can point to an educator that influenced their practice or even following their footsteps into this field. And I'm grateful to have a few of those people myself. And to answer this question, though, about desirable characteristics, I'd have to look outside of the traditional paradigm of education and instead look to our scientific pedagogy and what Dr. Montessori revealed as desirable characteristics of an educational guide. So in her writings and lectures, she used the language of virtues and characteristics to describe the adult's spiritual preparation. And today, research is uncovering how certain states of consciousness driven by emotional and social development can be seen as a spiritual framework by which those qualities emerge. And that's really where I'm heading in this conversation. And so over the past 15 years, I've asked this very question about what characteristics do teachers believe are conducive to learners? And many responses I received pointed to the technical side of our work. And I propose that educators who nurture their best selves and pursue specific states of consciousness will surpass the mechanics of Montessori pedagogy and allow people to adopt qualities that I would identify as a vitally responsive practitioner. And I'm okay with using that term, practitioner. And although it might be misconstrued as technical, my intent is more spiritual and describes one who's practicing an active state of responsiveness that's co-created with the child, themselves, the environment, and the cosmos. And Dr. Montessori said that the real preparation for education is the study of oneself. And the training of the teacher who is to help life is far more than the learning of ideas. It includes the training of character. It is a preparation of the spirit. So in my experience as a teacher or educator, I found that the most, or maybe the first desirable characteristic of an inspired educator is the courage to unlearn educational paradigms or other prejudices that we may have been conditioned by. And in affective science, that's the science of looking at emotions, this characteristic is identified as the personality trait of openness. And I might even venture to use the term growth mindset as a way of opening oneself to unlearn and learn. And the characteristic of unlearning is closely followed in importance in my understanding by the adult's vision and belief or trust in the child before them, that they have the potential to recreate humanity. Dr. Montessori called this a form of imagination. She wrote about it in Education for a New World. And I pulled this quote for today as well, because I found it quite poignant. She wrote, "An ordinary teacher cannot be transformed into a Montessori teacher, but must be created anew, having rid herself of pedagogical prejudices. The first step is self-preparation of the imagination, for the Montessori teacher has to visualize a child who is not yet there, materially speaking, and must have faith in the child who will reveal himself through work." So I find or think that the adult's faith in the child as a self-constructing organism, that's what we all are, as a process of both shedding previously held ideas about the purpose of education while simultaneously holding a flame of hope that fuels this evolution of understanding as adult learners and experience the power of the methodology.
Mm.
So it's going back, this idea of the openness with which guides begin with the unlearning part. And then this idea of having a grand imagination and trust in the child is based on a fundamental assumption that Dr. Montessori's vision that every child has within them the potential to shift the character of humanity.
Mm.
And it's the learning environment prepared and maintained by us, by the vitally responsive practitioners, is the crucible that forges this new human. And it sets the stage for a more peaceful and just world.
Mm.
And I could keep going on, Tamara, and on.
Well, there's so much in there. So I'm taking some notes here because always we want to marry these big, beautiful ideas and say, okay, so what does that look like in the classroom? And what I hear is trust in the process, openness, self-preparation of the imagination, which I actually have not, at least I don't remember hearing that, and I didn't have that present. So help us understand before you go on, because this is beautiful, and I feel like I have to share with you, I feel like this is it's beyond even character development, it is spiritual development, right? It is that highest level of what we're asking our teachers to do and be, which what a gift to us as educators to be asked and called upon to grow in this way so that we are then called upon to be our highest and best selves. I am personally so profoundly grateful that I found Montessori and found something that asked me every day to show up as my best self, because it's made me a better human being. And personally, I think that that's the gift of life, is to find something that calls onto you in that way. So that's what you're really telling us, is you're saying you are called on to bring these pieces of yourself that may have been hidden, they may have been thwarted in your own childhood, they may have been suffocated in your own education, right? Mm-hmm. And we're asking that we dig deep within to that still small place inside of us and find it. If it has been put out, we find it and we reignite it, and we serve it and we support it and we grow it. And it's that spirituality, and that's the character, right? That's the character development we're talking about in the Montessori guide. And so my question for you is, it's like, can you see I'm processing?
I do. Me too. I'm listening carefully.
I'm an interpersonal learner. Thank you, Howard Gardner, and love to talk about things that I'm learning. And so talk about when you see a guide that has those qualities and is bringing that into a classroom, what do you see? What does that feel like? What's the flow like? How do you know?
That's a great question. First of all, I just want to put out there that this is a continuum, that there's no beginning and no end. And to answer your question, I believe that there are qualities of character that stand out to me in my observations of classrooms. I can give you some examples. I was recently at a school, happens to be in Istanbul, Turkey, and the head of school is a guide from South Africa, and her passion is to connect the children with the natural world and to help them find their resilient, courageous self. And to do so, she has to set aside and humble herself to the child before her. And on this particular day, I was observing the outdoor environment and the children running around with sticks. Everybody had a stick. And of course, that was new to me. I had to really step back and set aside my own prejudices about children on a playground with a stick, that alone. And then out of the corner of my eye, I catch this head of school walking along the top of the monkey bars with a 3-year-old in tow, walking step by step. And of course, my culture, my safety, my risk-taking for others, all that stuff started bubbling up and I had to notice it. And then I observed her and her absolute trust of the child and the methodology with which we all accept and dive into. And I would say that is a spiritually prepared human before me that's been able to set aside some of the constructs that tell her, of course, not a child walking on top of the bars that she herself was doing with them. And she offered enough scaffolding for that child to feel so capable. So that's outside of the classroom. It's one quality that I see is this incredible trust, and in a literal sense as well. Right? Yeah. In the classroom, I observe qualities of guides of incredible patience, but it transcends patience because there's this deep-seated empathy. And I heard Dr. Cindy Acker through the International Montessori Council the other day talk about true empathy isn't just stepping into another's shoes. It's about taking yours off first. And that kind of blew my mind. I love that idea that we must first take our own shoes off before we can step into that of another. And so in our practice with children, I think of that level of empathy, of taking our own shoes off first, which means the unlearning has to happen and we have to humble ourselves to do so. Those are some of the qualities of character. Now, Dr. Montessori did have other virtues that I see in the classrooms around the world, and that everybody's kind of striving from where they are when they're paying attention. And like some of those, I know that she said in the advanced Montessori method that we should at once be precise like that of the scientist and spiritual like that of the saint. Right?
I love that quote.
That quote kind of blows my mind because it's this entwinement of the spirit and the science. And that's where I'm living. I was raised in a family that my spiritual practice, if you will, was being kicked outside every morning. And I had the free range childhood with, kind of big risk taking. I'm the one that got lots of broken bones, that like lots of risk taking and a little feral. And there was no formal spiritual training, but the forest was my cathedral, literally. It is where I think I had the deepest contemplation of self. And today, my daily walks are that for me as well. That is my spiritual practice, if you will. So I came at the idea of spiritual preparation through the scientific realm. Ties helped me do that, brings many of the pieces together that had been floating around in my radar for quite a while. And in this idea, character or spiritual preparation and character development really has an underlying understanding through the work of Dr. Montessori and many others, including Thomas Berry, of whom we study at Ties, Fritjof Capra, Brian Thomas Swim, some of these amazing people who understand the science and the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's some of the study that I do. And I look at how I want to know why. I am deeply curious about all things. And I want to know why. And how is it that we transform? How is it that we come out of our Montessori training feeling like new humans ourselves? Shedding the skin, but adopting a new, what are the mechanisms in my brain and in my heart, because everything's connected, that is making that happen. And so it keeps leading me back to this kind of feedback loop of my own emotional state, which is expressed through feelings, and certain types of emotions lead us toward greater character development. So my research is in the work of awe and wonder, and there's a whole new field of science called the science of awe, and I have applied that to our work and our spiritual preparation. And actually, I'm going to be talking a lot more about that when I come to you in Greenspring in the spring. So, and I'm sure there's going to be more information about that coming out. But this idea that our emotions alone can be harnessed as a catalyst toward more refined characteristics, I think is part of this science and spirit. So we have to understand more about those emotions. And I'm looking at a whole group or collection of emotions called prosocial emotions, of which awe is one. And love is another. Dr. Montessori talks a ton about love, right?
So when you're looking at a classroom and you're looking to, a lot of our listeners are in a classroom, which is so beautiful, doing that work,
doing the work,
the most important work as far as I'm concerned, really working towards peace on earth. And can you talk about those prosocial emotions and how our people can support their own understanding, ability to live in those emotions, and also how do they support our children in building those skills?
So prosocial emotions are those that manifest in behaviors that assist or benefit others. And those might look, we're really fortunate in Montessori. We definitely attract folks who have a proclivity or a tendency toward prosocial emotions. They're ones that help, that you will see as cooperating, caring, sharing, comforting, collaborating. For instance, when love moves you to console a child, or when compassion drives you to forgive others, or when altruism leads you to step in to assist without any thought to how you benefit, you're experiencing perceptions from your prosocial emotions. And there's some great benefits here. Because I'm always asking why. Why is this even important? So experiencing prosocial emotions reduces stress. It increases our social connectivity. It can also be a mood booster. And each emotion has a range of feelings and subsequent behaviors, including a form of altruism and empathy that we might recognize as reciprocity, or in Dr. Montessori's terms, a cosmic task within a cosmic plan where all things are interconnected and interdependent. And I believe that we're talking about these emotions as part of our inner work. And as I've learned, the more we're aware of certain emotions, we're more apt to experience them. And we may even amplify certain desirable character traits. So, for instance, when we lean into the elicitors of awe-related states, we become more disposed to it, what's called dispositional awe. And it's a kind of sensitivity that expresses itself in profound ways, including that feeling of being diminished or the sense of small self. And this really kind of manifests for educators as increased altruism, greater understanding in the nature of science, increased curiosity or need to seek information, and a greater social connection with others. And so, how might we elicit some of these pro-social emotions in our life? So, when we engage in mindfulness activities such as forest bathing, meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, or even our very own walking on the line or the silence game, we're better able to use metacognition as a tool for recognizing and amplifying pro-social emotions in our lives. It's the metacognition that we develop mostly as adults. That doesn't start until about 10 years old, apparently. And that when we become more aware of something, we put our attention to it. And when it comes to our emotional state, we can amplify some of those emotions the more attention we bring to it. So while my research is based on the science of awe and how it might be used as a transformational tool to prepare ourselves spiritually for this work, I believe there is much work to be done in relation to other pro-social emotions such as love and gratitude, and how that might amplify our work as educators. And then when we translate this back into the classroom, the more we're paying attention to these pro-social emotions, the more we understand them, the more disposed we are to have them become part of self. There's that character development. Then the more opportunities our children have to absorb. They have these incredible plastic brains that are mirroring our emotional state. They too will become more predisposed toward awe. So in practice, I think about all the opportunities in the classroom for noticing cooperation and gratitude, altruism, love. I think that today's science is catching up to Dr. Montessori's understanding that of all things, love is the most potent.
Right.
And when I understand the neurobiology of that, I know it's transformational.
I absolutely love that. And it was interesting because just to underscore what you're saying, I think we so often as Montessori educators focus on the lessons we're going to give and preparing the environment, which are important for sure. But it's easy to step over our own spiritual work, and then we're missing that groundedness that allows the children to then mirror that groundedness. Because all those things that you're talking about, love, awe, wonder, gratitude, we can come in with, maybe not every day, but a lot of the day that, if we're doing the work, we're going to show up with our hearts full and really having that ability to co-regulate our children into those spaces. And the truth is that many of our children, not all by any means, but many are coming from very busy homes, from parents who may not have the focus on these other pieces. And it's, I know people who are they're go, and there's not room for this. So how are our children going to learn awe, wonder, curiosity, patience, love, all of those things if they don't have role models? So when I'm listening to you, what I'm actually hearing is this is our most important work as an educator, that this I mean, even if you don't give a math lesson that day,
Mhm.
if you can co-regulate your children and provide this foundation for them, and they get to build this skill. And meanwhile, I would imagine those things that Dr. Montessori already had, walking the line, she had the silence game, she had those things built in, but we can do more with that. We can, as we start to understand and have our own experiences, our own awakenings, we
Mhm.
will bring those into the classroom to the children. And I don't think there's anything more important for their lifetimes than what you're calling pro-social emotions. And having a connection to those. The other thing I just want to underscore that I love that you just said is basically where we're putting our attention is what we're creating more of.
Yes.
And so it's really tempting, right? Our brain is designed to see the saber-toothed tiger and to worry about and go into danger mode and, oh my gosh, and have the fear and have this concern. And if we can live there, it's so easy to live there.
Mhm.
And it takes incredible intentionality to rewire our brains to be willing to be in gratitude and love and compassion and all of those emotions that we're talking about. And so I think that that's one of those pieces for us as educators. Again, lucky us. I mean, really lucky us. We get to hold this space for ourselves because we're holding it for the children. I can't even tell you how many things I do better or I bring my highest self to in life because I have my own children and because I work in a school with children. I I remember early on, when I was first teaching, I'd go out late with friends in the night and then I'd come in the next morning and with the children, I'd be cranky. And all of a sudden I realized I couldn't do that to them. It wasn't fair. And I started getting enough sleep for them, right? It's a great motivator because we're not always willing to do that work for ourselves. So what we're talking about is our character development as really people because we're calling on that best self for the children. And so there's so much in there that you're talking about, Tammy. I can't wait to, I just want you to know, I'm already looking forward to listening to this again.
I'm so glad. Dr. Montessori said we are created in order to evolve the cosmos.
Mm. Mm.
So when we think about that, what is she really talking about? What does she mean by that? This idea that we're created to evolve the cosmos. Wait a minute, the cosmos is doing its thing. How do we have any agency in this? And I keep coming back to this idea, the essence of Montessori, this task to create the new human that is building consciousness out there that sees it's a cosmic consciousness. And the idea that a cosmic consciousness is one with which sees all things as interconnected and interdependent. And that, to me, is the essence of Montessori. That is the essence of what it is to be human. I think that could bring about peace on earth within and without.
Mm.
I also think of this idea of that essence that she talks about in terms of love and virtue and peace as a more active partner in our lives. Like Dr. Philip Snowgang, who runs the TIES program, doesn't talk about peace. He talks about piecing. It is an active verb.
Mm.
And in that, I think of that's what we do. We're not guides, we're guiding.
Mhm.
And because we are being absorbed effortlessly or engaged upon in relation with our students, I think about the importance of this inner work. None of us is perfect. We're designed that way.
Mhm.
But it's one of my favorite neuroscientists is Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa. I'll give you more information about her.
Mm.
But she always talks about how The brain, let's see, the brain does best what it does the most. So if we are in practice of these prosocial emotions, we practice the behaviors of gratitude. We practice love. You know, I joked around earlier about radical acceptance. That is something I practice. I work at it. All, you know, perfection is not, it's not possible, because we're evolved based on these little gaps in our development. All things do. We adapt to what's around us constantly. So we're creating culture of this essence of these prosocial emotions. We are creating it within. We're building these feedback loops for children in which they're immersed in love and gratitude and awe. And then what happens with them when they leave is that they hold that as part of their very being, their self, because they're self-constructing in relation to their environment.
Okay, so help us all know. Can you give us an example or two on radical acceptance? Some
Yeah.
may not know what that means. When's the last time you used that with yourself or with someone else? And
Today.
okay, great, perfect.
I think that radical acceptance first came into my life from my daughter, who is now 25. And imagine that as a Montessori kid from 4 months on, has a very clear sense of self. And that self doesn't always jive with the greater constructs of our culture on what it is to be. And I have had to work sometimes on a daily practice to accept the expression of self that my daughter has gifted me with. And so that may still be really out there. In the classroom setting, there's always going to be a child or two that we do not yet understand. And yet, radical acceptance at play would look at this child with all their parts, to know and have the compassion that there are root causes for certain behavior, and that I don't understand them yet. So I can lean into that growth mindset as a tool for radical acceptance.
So I just want to dig in a little bit more here, because I think this is such an important concept, and I think it's one that it is so valuable when deeply understood, particularly by teachers. So you have a little guy who comes in and he's throwing all the materials on the floor, and you're ending up with your assistant following him around the classroom, and you feel like now you can't get to your other students because you have this little guy. And so that's the balance, right, that our guides are facing. That's how do I serve this whole community of children who need me? And you have where you have this person who clearly needs more. Can you talk about that? Like, what does that look like?
So initially, I can talk to that with the absence of some of these prosocial emotions and the intentionality and metacognition of them, which is the game changer. So without those in place, I think that it's very easy to build resentment towards the child, towards the administrator or the system that placed them in your classroom without your tools to be able to support them.
Their parents.
There could be lots of resentment, anger, emotions that are real and are in some ways a habit. Because what the mind does the most, the mind does best, what the mind does the most. And the mind also includes, and I can go into this a little further, but of course we have understanding now about emotions in the mind and how it's attached to your vagal nerve, which is more in your abdomen and like how that all works. Like there's so much there that we could keep on teasing out. But that's in the absence of. And you're likely to get stuck in a cycle with the child that is very discouraging. The child will become discouraged because their behavior is not giving you the communication that you need to understand them, to be able to serve them better, to shift their behavior into more positive ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we take it on ourselves. I have been that guide that cries on the way to school every morning thinking, I have no clue what I'm going to do with this child. I don't know how to support them. And I start beating myself up. Now that's really becoming this cycle that isn't going to help anybody, right? But when I start utilizing some of that intentionality for a prosocial emotion, and for this one, it would be radical acceptance, right? That on my drive home or drive to school each day, I had a long commute in Seattle. That's why this works for this example. I'd be driving along and I would visualize the child in white light and how that white light was love and acceptance from me. And as I connected with that child each morning, day in, day out, day in, day out, they felt that. I changed in my responsiveness to the child. I changed my heart toward them. And in turn, they shifted their behavior toward me. We developed better trust. Not all the behaviors disappear because all the conditions are still there, other than what I'm bringing to the table. And for that child to feel like they're capable and they belong, that they are accepted, and that they could make the mistakes with me. They could make the social missteps they were making. And I would still hold space for them to be their better selves, because I knew that I could do that now because I did it for myself. I held space for myself to do better by the child. I think that puts the power back on us. I always, in my work with schools, I always bring up our Montessori triad, the Trinity, that we don't have control over the child. We have control over ourselves and the conditions around the child to a certain extent, the environment. And so that's where we need to pay attention. I can walk into a classroom, actually, now I'm thinking about this, Tamara, and I just had this experience where I can feel some of the energy of the classroom. And that might feel really woo-woo to some people. I'm completely comfortable with it because I know that tacitly in my gut, I feel a climate, and it's a climate of love or discouragement, a climate of, acceptance or blame. You can feel those things, and that energy, is palpable. And so that's kind of that big picture of how this work, this spiritual work, has a direct application. Our minds are phenomenal, and those mirror neurons in the child can mimic what they see. So even if you're faking it till you make it, they might be faking it till they make it. It still works. The outcome is still the same.
So what are tools? Okay, so we have somebody who's listening to our podcast today.
Yeah.
And they're going back in the classroom tomorrow, and they've got this little guy. So we're going to hold him in the light. We're going to surround him in love. We're going to visualize that. We know there's so much research out about how well that works. Okay, so those of you who are science-based, it is also based in science, just clearly. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. And then what are other tools that people can use to support, really supporting the children and themselves in those moments? Because the work can be challenging.
Mhm.
It does.
Yeah,
I don't want to say that it is,
no,
right?
no,
And I used to say it's
absolutely.
hard, it's hard, it's hard. I talk about, talk about programming. I was programming that for my whole staff. I don't say that anymore. It can be challenging. It's also incredibly rewarding and deeply inspiring and all of those pieces. And there can be days and there can be children that need extra support. So I love the concept of surrounding them in light visually and holding that space. And every time you think of them, you bring that vision into your mind so that there's not this, that I will tell you, one of the tools I know is when you're tempted to complain about that child to your assistant or to your colleague, stop yourself, right? And go to a language of reverence. So the language of reverence is, you can say what is so. That I have a child who threw 6 materials on the ground today, and I felt frustrated. That's all accurate. He's not bad. His parents aren't awful. They're not, all of those judgment words we've got to get rid of out of our lives. And then, because if we're saying, and I felt this way, can you support me in doing the work that I need to do to be emotionally prepared to support that child? So you're seeking that counsel, that support. That's very different than, I hear often, well, I need to vent. Do not vent to someone at school. You're enrolling that person in the concept of this child being so awful.
Mhm.
And as soon as you have 2 people who are holding the child in that vein, there's not a chance the child has to ever break out, right? So
Yeah.
we don't want to do, so we're going to really seek understanding. We're going to use the language of reverence
Mhm.
towards the children, and always speak about them with reverence as the people they will become. I'm sure you have some other tools. This is the part, I know these are the parts that our guides, they love this part where we dig in this way.
Yeah, that's great. I have I have 2 phrases to offer. One comes from my dear friend, Kitty Bravo. She uses this phrase all the time, and I've adopted in my life and in my practice, and I do believe this can shift gears. She uses a lot of, I wonder.
Mm,
The tentative voice rather than the directive engenders curiosity.
mm,
It creates within ourselves that curiosity. And so I start a lot of sentences in my mind. I wonder.
mhm, mhm,
You also do so with children.
mm,
So I wonder what's going on here. Anybody want to share?
mhm,
Instead, it shifts our framework to be far more positive, to pull on those prosocial emotions.
mhm.
Another phrase I use a lot is I noticed. And that alone kind of reduces any of the shame or blaming cycles that like I was raised in. Or and I think that recognition of what is my default teaching mode or parenting mode or style
Mm.
really helps. That slows everything down. I wonder and I noticed. Um, Another tool that I might use is the one that we know categorically above all can engender awe and wonder is to get them outside.
Mm, mm,
Is that nature is the consummate designer and self-regulator.
mhm,
And I think about some of the wonderful stories that Dr. Gang has shared with me about he's friends with the Montessori family, and Mario Sr. would tell him the stories of walking through the forest in Adyar in India, while Dr. Montessori would be working inside, and he'd be with the students outside in the forest. And that they'd come up with a question and he'd pull out his little notepad, and that became the beginning of the Montessori charts. And
oh,
right, that it was the interconnectivity with nature and with the cosmos, those big questions that we're asking. So if you're an elementary guide and beyond, live there, live in this place of wonder. And the self-regulation and those moments may diminish. I love what you're talking about, this language of reverence. I had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Donna Hicks, who wrote Leading with Dignity. And she was speaking at the AMI USA this year. And this idea of offering the child that moment of dignity when things are especially rough, I think really struck me in all interactions. You're talking about not venting with another adult. Well, it's in part because you want to offer that other adult dignity, and for them to hold your stuff, if you will, is incredibly unjust for them, that they're now holding something and it changes you. So that idea of dignity and digging into dignity, for our first plane, I was trained in a tradition that talked about values with children. And we had this idea so that love is manifest in a concrete way. And so we would have a jar of red water that would symbolize love. And we choose it. We choose love. We choose peace. We choose kindness. We choose right action. And so talking about values with our children, I think, is yet another tool that we can come to more indirectly. I was going to save this to later, but I must say it now because it works so perfectly. Ram Dass talked about don't teach, radiate. And that gets me. Every time I think of that, it's like Dr. Montessori did not intend this to be in direct instruction. The nature of the child, the nature of the human is to self-construct understanding. So we're just creating the conditions around the child through our inner work, as well as the creation of this environment that greets the child where they are. And so if we're radiating, then that is shifting the energy in our community. Right?
I want to radiate. I want to radiate. I want to radiate.
You do radiate.
Well, but I mean, like choosing it.
We choose it. We choose this.
I have to tell you, and we do have to wrap up. We're at 55 minutes, if you can believe it. It's gone so fast. I feel like this has just been a blink of an eye. But I'm so excited to share with you all that if you would like more information and to learn more and to spend more time with Tammy, we are bringing her in April 1st, 2024. She's doing a whole day on awe and wonder, and we'll go deeply into this work. And I think it's going to be transformative. I will definitely be there and hope you will join me. And Tammy, I just have to underscore, I think it's so important right now because especially now I hear so much concern, so much need, so much work that needs to be done around mental health. Not that there are not mental health issues, but we also have to be actively engaged in our own mental health and creating mental health. And I think that I really just want to underscore what you're talking about, of where we're putting our attention and really making those choices as best we can. Now, clearly, there are some folks that need more support than that. But for many of us who are caught in that place where it's easy to get swept up in the busyness, it's easy to get swept up in the stress, it's easy to get swept up in the grief of the world right now as we look at our environment, at our political system. we actually have an opportunity to choose something different and to put our attention on hope and right action, as you said. I love that. I think that comes from Dr. Gang, right? And that
It's a Buddhist term, and
oh,
Dr. Gay uses it in his book.
in his
Yes.
right. So, and this is our big work. It takes study and practice to build these skills. There's no magic pixie dust where they happen to you, and we as human beings have to be actively engaged in them. And I think you've done such a beautiful job of speaking to the character development that we as educators need, and giving us such a beautiful and toothsome, chewy, juicy opportunity to think about ourselves and our classrooms and our schools in these ways. So thank you. Like, is there anything else that you want to add before we close?
Well, thank you, Tamara. Thank you for creating this portal for us to connect on really big ideas. I did just want to share with you that the TIES graduate program is open and ready for its next cohort. So if you're interested in graduate studies, it's a Master's of Ed in Montessori Integrative Learning. And I have to tell you, it is profound work that leads you to the entwinement of the science and the spirit. It's right in alignment with Dr. Montessori's vision of the optimal guide for children.
I agree with that. It took me 4 master's programs to find TIES, and I love it so much. I talk about it all the time. I talk about what I'm learning. It's shaping my leadership. It's shaping my thinking as a parent. It's shaping how I spend my time. It's really been transformative. And I'm so profoundly grateful to have found it. And it feels to me like it's been almost a secret, because I've been in Montessori for 25 years and I didn't know about it. And so I'm singing it from the highest rooftops with you, Tammy. Like, it just has been such a gift, and it really was what I was looking for all along. And I'm profoundly grateful. So, yes, check out the TIES website. We can drop that in to your show notes as well, Tammy, so people don't have to hunt for it. You can find it there. Also, just so you know, they have a master's in integrative leadership as well, which is the program that I'm in. And so really, first time as an adult that I feel like I've really been treated as it's a Montessori program. I just finished a paper, and my advisor has sent it back to me 3 times with the most thoughtful edits, asking me to think through things differently. She's so partnering with me. And anyway, so yes.
It's the catalyst for transformation. So if you want a real jump start on this work,
it's where ecology meets Montessori, meets spirituality, meets the cosmos. It really is all of that and a bag of chips. So thank you so much for being here, Tammy. It's been absolutely a pleasure. We're so excited to bring you into Greenspring in the spring, and hopefully we'll have you back sometime soon.
Ooh, thank you so much, Tamara. Really appreciate it. Wait to see you in April.
Yes, in person.
I know.
Thanks. And to you, our listeners, thank you so much for being with us today. We love the time we spend with you. The work that you're doing is so important, the most important, and you're making such a difference in our world. Please subscribe to our podcast to hear the latest episodes and join in the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. Listeners, thank you for spending time with us today. The work you do is so important, and we're here to help. Join us next time.